Writing Immortality. That is what I am thinking about right now as I draw one of the characters from my books. This is Arthel. He is a mathematician in my first book. He has nothing to do with this train of thought. It's just currently what I'm working on as I think. And the reason that I'm thinking about this is because I've had a lot of preconceived notions about different authors and storytellers tackling immortality that have kind of started to go away over the past couple months. And I now come to you with a question. And that question is about maturity. How much of maturity is tied to the inevitable decay of the human form? Like, how much of our own maturity is directly tied to the physical process of us aging? That's something that I've actually been thinking a lot about recently. Just, thinking about writing immortal characters, or any time that I've experienced it in literature or media. It's something that I don't know when it entered my head, but it's something that I've just been thinking about more and more, right? If you think about maturity, I think that most people would agree that, maturity is the byproduct of learning from our own experiences and the experiences of others. And to an extent, I think that that's absolutely true. But I just started to think about it also in this regard, right? If I was given immortality right now, right? Or even when I was a little bit younger, like let's say when I was 22, 23 years old, I had immortality bestowed upon me. All right. Maybe I would take that in the most productive route I possibly could. I would choose personal edification. I would choose, enrichment. I would travel the world. I would learn. I would write books. I would serve my community. Perhaps that's what I would do. But also maybe it's not, right? Because now, without the pressure of time driving me towards that, I can always just get around to it later, right? Like, I can always just choose to, what's a decade? I can choose to enrich myself in 10 years, in 100 years. I guess it really doesn't matter at this point. And that's when I started to think, like, okay, maturity, right? The reason that a lot of people don't go out and party, the reason that a lot of people have their lives together when they do, is because there's kind of a societal expectation around having your life together at a certain age. I'm not here to prescribe that certain age or even what having your life together looks like. But, there is a stigma if you see like a 35-year-old hanging out at a college bar, right? It's like, come on, man, what are you doing here? And I know for a fact that there's people who, if that stigma is the only thing holding them back from that lifestyle, So, again, my question is, how much would we really mature if we didn't age? It's a question that I don't have a solution for it. This is just, something that as I'm writing, this is just something that I'm thinking about. Because you have a lot of immortal characters written from a cultural sense, like they're granted immortality by dint of nature. Like, elves, that's probably the easiest example to pull out from somewhere, Elves in most iterations of fantasy and literature are immortal just because of their race. And because of that, their entire culture is immortal. So that seems a little bit easier to write because, you would have entirely different cultural stigmas and expectations behind, what you were supposed to be doing with your life. And if, time wasn't a factor, how this race would combat that lack of pressure. And I'm sure that I know that that comes with an entirely different set of issues as far as like explaining away the nuances of that culture. But specifically with something like this, like a character being dropped into a society where everyone around them does decay and wither with time, and he alone does not. I used to think that characters like that would have, such a hard time assimilating because they would be so much more mature and so much more developed than everybody around them. And I'm not certain that that's the case anymore. And maybe it is. I don't know. I'm just, going through it in my head as I'm sitting here drawing and trying to kind of make sense of that, right? I think that there's just a lot more of behavioral maturity tied to the inevitable decay of the human form than I had previously granted weight onto. I think that, just there is a certain amount of expectation that we place on individuals based on nothing but looks alone, right? When I see someone, 80 years old, right? Before I even speak to them, I'm approaching them almost with the understanding that I am inferior to them in a lot of ways, experiences and, perhaps maturity. And I think that, without that, there kind of just tends to be this lack of understanding. That's what I was thinking of. Sorry, had to gather my thoughts there for a second. And I think that in the same way you couldn't ever explain war to someone that has never experienced it, you also couldn't really explain the battle against time that all humans experience to someone that's not experiencing it. And, typically across media or literature, people don't get turned immortal, at the ripe age of 60. It's usually, when they're younger, and they may have never felt that. I'm a younger guy myself, and I am still not feeling that crushing pressure of time to get everything that I want to done, before I finally do depart, like perhaps someone that's maybe on the eve of their life. And I think that that's an experience, and that's something that you could never tell to an immortal being, or that's not something that you could ever make them feel. And I think that that's such a vital part of the human condition. That is the human condition. And if you don't have that, I don't even know what you're really left with. And I think that it makes, writing an immortal character extremely difficult, to the extent that I'm almost just willing to accept any iteration that gets written about it, because we don't really know. I mean, perhaps if you were, a 18-year-old for 300 years, you would be infatuated with 17-year-olds. I don't know. And it's just something that, like, I'm not casting stones at as much anymore, because the more I think about it, the more impossible it seems to get right. At least in my mind, as I'm writing and thinking about it, the only outcome is that of absolute and unadulterated crippling depression. I really think that that's the only outcome for an immortal being, at least one that's alone in this world. I think that the more people you add to the equation that are like them, perhaps it starts to look a little bit less grim. I don't know. But I think that this crippling feeling of loneliness would only be able to be endured for, like, honestly, like maybe 150 years, maybe. Again, that could be a completely arbitrary figure. I don't know, but that's just kind of what I'm thinking about as I'm sitting here, drawing. It might not be a particularly original take. I don't know. I know that I used to be a lot more harsh on writers when they wrote immortal beings, and I'm mostly saying this because, like, the more that I've thought about it, the less I have a solution about how I would make an immortal character within my own work. And yeah, so it's just a rant as I draw, as I promised, true to my word. That's what this is gonna be. Yeah, so that's about it.